Hey all, a common sense patriot again. We finished Equal Justice Part 2, I guess, a couple of weeks ago with number 4. So we'll finish today with numbers 5, 6, and 7. Also, sorry for the delay again. I fully intended to post Part 2B the next day, but I couldn't get it to download or upload or whatever it's called. I'm also challenged by the slow Wi-Fi we have up here in the Rockies, and I'm new to the technology of doing videos instead of writing my thoughts. And that, my friends, is exacerbated by the fact that I'm an absolute technological dinosaur. But I think I'm starting to figure it out. Anyway, before we go into number 5, I've been challenged a few times about the suggestion that law enforcement be required to give only 2 clear commands, like put your hands where I can see them, or turn around and put your hands behind your back, or any other command that a cop is authorized by law to give a suspect before using non-lethal means to bring a suspect into compliance. Also, some questioned the 2-command rule for drop the gun before shooting a suspect. Look, the point is not the number of commands before the situation must be moved to compliance. Pick any number you want. 5 commands, 10, 25. The point is that at some point the negotiation must end. There must be a hard and consistent boundary. People need to know exactly where the edge of the cliff is so they can make the personal decision to step into the abyss or not. It is the very fact that we do not have hard boundaries on virtually anything anymore, including legal issues, that has taken us so far from where our founders started. Everything has become a negotiation. And as a result, folks simply don't know where to stop pushing the limits of the law. So as a result, our cops are in a tough place, because they now know so many people expect an encounter with law enforcement to be a negotiation. So how do our policemen and women draw a hard line when they know people have become used to fuzzy boundaries on everything? Why do we put law enforcement in the confusing and uncomfortable position of having to make a personal decision about when enough is enough? That's exactly what gets these police-citizen encounters rolling toward becoming an incident. In one case, a cop tells a suspect with a weapon to drop it dozens of times, and then ends up getting tackled by the suspect, who gets a hold of his gun. Fortunately, his partner shoots the suspect before he can shoot the tackled cop. Then another cop tells a guy to drop the gun 3 times and shoots him for not complying. Those aren't made-up stories. They're real occurrences. They're very confusing to everyone, and that stuff happens all the time. Cops and citizens alike must know the rules, and the rules cannot be broken, ever, by the cop or the crook. So folks, pick a number of times a cop must tell a suspect to comply with his or her commands, but then be willing to live with the number you pick every time. Okay, so number 5. Let's look at the other side of the equation for a minute, the law enforcement perspective and their frustrations with inconsistency and inequality, which I believe is a factor to one degree or another in some of these instances where cops go too far. The question that occurs to me is, why can we not have a standardized process for what happens when a cop makes a good arrest? To have the immediate aftermath of an arrest be so arbitrary is unfair and unreasonable to police officers. It encourages more crime for them to deal with down the road when a crook is rightfully arrested, but is immediately, or at least very quickly, put back on the street. When they're arrested, people need to stay in jail until they're acquitted or convicted and sentenced. Yes, there are certain crimes that might warrant a release on your own recognizance kind of thing, but lots that are released that way never should be. Thus, the huge number of warrants for rearrest issued for crooks that simply don't show up for trial. And yeah, I can already hear the liberal pushback. But we just don't have the room in our jails for that. Well, why don't we quit sending so much of we the people's money overseas? Or spending it on Planned Parenthood? Or benefits for illegal immigrants? Why don't we quit paying our citizens more not to work than they'll earn working, so they'll stay on the couch and become good socialist government dependents? In any case, why don't we quit spending we the people's money on all kinds of things it should never be spent on in the first place? And then we'd have plenty to spend on stuff it should be spent on. In this particular case, if our government spent only on things it should, we'd have the resources available to put a whole bunch of folks to work building and upgrading jails and prisons. Facilities we could use into the future to equally and consistently implement our republic's founding principle of governing by swift and consistent application of our laws. And if we'll demand what I proposed earlier, eliminating the vast majority of the unnecessary laws we have on the books, it could then be an application of a much reduced and simplified list of fair and reasonable laws. My gosh, we're a civilized society. So we don't torture people or beat them or cut their hand off for stealing something, but we do lock them up for breaking the law, or at least we're supposed to. So we need to get back to how it was designed to work in the first place. A big part of the problem is what I spoke about a moment ago, that cops know for a fact that justice often isn't applied as it should be to the crooks they arrest. You wonder why some cops, who are actually pretty nice guys and gals in general, go to work every day with a bit of a chip on their shoulder or an attitude? Well, put yourself in the cop's shoes. How would you like to go out day after day, doing a dangerous job enforcing the laws of the land and arresting criminals for breaking the law, only to have some liberal judge put the crook back on the street within hours of their arrest? How would you like to arrest the same asshole multiple times for the same offenses, and then see him on the same street corner committing the same crimes instead of being in prison? Think you'd have a bit of an attitude? I know I would. But back to the point of what our cops face when they arrest a crook. Even good judges, at times, probably release bad guys quickly because they're tired of the impossibility of a conviction, and because jails and prisons are overcrowded. They slap their wrists, even though they know with certainty the criminal very much broke the law. As an analogy, how long would you have a good workplace attitude if you were a carpenter framing houses? And at the end of the shift, a couple of times a week, the superintendent showed up in a bulldozer and tore your day's work down. I dare say you'd probably develop a less than chipper attitude about your job pretty quickly. It's a travesty. Number 6, swift justice. Why does it take many months, and in some cases years, for the justice system to simply try a case and acquit or sentence? The typical answer is that the excessive amount of time is to make sure the lawyers can collect all the evidence and make the best case possible to defend or prosecute so the verdict is correct. Bullshit. It's so lawyers can get rich. Remember that propagate their species part? Because even when years are taken to prosecute a case, we still occasionally get inaccurate verdicts. A case in point is the O.J. Simpson trial. That charade went on way too long, cost we the people way too much money, and he was eventually acquitted. But they've never seriously looked for or found anyone else to charge. Really? It's that kind of thing that breeds mistrust. Folks see these long, drawn-out cases as being vehicles for the attorneys to line their pockets, and that no more accurate verdicts result. And what about equal application of the law? If O.J. hadn't been the juice, and the suspect had been a cab driver who lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Reseda, Do you think the trial would have taken almost 6 months to begin and then 11 months to finish, making it almost a year and a half to come to an acquittal? Remember that whole time is money thing? How much do you think that stupid soap opera cost we the people? And do you believe a verdict of not guilty would have been brought in for a working guy with a long recorded history of physical violence and verbal death threats against his ex-wife? Particularly when there wasn't then, and still isn't 25 years later, another credible suspect. Lyle and Eric Menendez shotgunned their folks in 1989, were arrested for the double murder in 1990, but the trial didn't occur until 1993. If they weren't from a wealthy family, do you really think that trial would have been delayed for 3 years? Do you think Felicity Huffman, who cheated to get her daughter into college, committing mail fraud amongst other things, and costing some other kid a chance to get into college who'd earned it, but was denied because the new student quota had been filled by Huffman's daughter, would have gotten off with a 14-day sentence had she not been a celebrity? Oh, and furthermore, do you think she would have been let out after serving only 11 days of that sentence if she hadn't been one of the desperate housewives? She was apparently set free early because of a Bureau of Prisons policy that allows inmates to leave before a release date that falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday on the last preceding weekday, blah, blah, blah. Do you naively believe her sentence start date wasn't set with that exact provision in mind? If she hadn't been a celebrity, things would have been different, I assure you. Finally, as mentioned in the previous video, being incarcerated should suck, and suck badly. And again, I'm not talking about being inhumane to anyone, but you should be in a cell for 23 hours a day with an hour to get out and exercise. That exercise should be limited to walking or running for cardio, and things like jumping jacks, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, etc. There should be no weight training to send pumped up, extra muscular crooks back onto the streets who have already shown a propensity to crime. And no games, like basketball or volleyball, etc. Why? Because games are for fun, and there should be no fun while you're incarcerated. While in the cells, access to educational materials only, whether in books or computer, but no internet access, other than email, and that should be monitored. The food should be very healthy, but bland. Now, I already know there are those of you who are thinking that would be a violation of human rights and qualifies as the aforementioned cruel and unusual punishment. That's crap. When you break the law, you should have to give up your rights to certain things while you're incarcerated. 2 things will come of this. First, as I already mentioned, rehabilitation by wanting to avoid going back into prison because it sucks to be in prison. Second, I believe we can have significantly shorter sentences for most crimes, particularly for first offenders. Again, because it sucks so badly to be in prison. And because sentences will be relatively short, there should be no such thing as parole. Also, shorter sentences and less amenities and recreation and fun and more time locked in a cell where they deserve to be means a lower overall expense to we the people. So folks, if we have true intention to take the heat out of the issue of the relationship between the police and our nation's citizens, particularly those folks of lower income black populations, we must revamp our justice system to generate a consistent environment that we the people can all trust, particularly our black citizens. There must be a radical simplification of our law and crime structure, and hard boundaries for law enforcement and citizens alike. We must demand mandatory and swift trial dates, with the clock ticking from the moment of the arrest. Maximum time from arrest to trial should be 90 days, which would require our justice system to move its ass. Trials must have a maximum length schedule, but in no case should a trial last more than a week. Judges must have hard sentencing schedules that are not up for interpretation or manipulation. Time incarcerated should be healthy and short, but very Spartan. And most importantly, justice must be applied absolutely equally, regardless of race, geographic location, or socioeconomic strata, with no exceptions, including cops. Justice must be blind. And that, folks, is all I have to say about equal justice. I think it's worth demanding from our government and even physically fighting for if we must. To close, I'd like to quote Andrew Hamilton, not, by the way, to be mistaken for Alexander Hamilton. If it be asked, what is the most sacred duty and the greatest source of our security in a republic? The answer would be an inviolable respect for the Constitution and laws. I'm Lou, a common sense patriot, and once again, Godspeed to all of you.